Welcome to Bedtime Science. Did you know that many women spend decades building invisible systems? Color-coded calendars, backup alarms, rehearsed conversations, just to appear as organized as the people around them. Tonight we look at what happens inside the brain when a woman learns, very early, to hide the way her attention actually works. In the next moments, we will gently discuss how the brain compensates for scattered focus with elaborate workarounds, why girls with ADHD are diagnosed on average 5 years later than boys, what chronic camouflaging does to the body's stress system over time, and what recent science reveals about the real cost of appearing fine. Before we begin, if you enjoy this kind of quiet storytelling, stay tuned for more updates. Now let's begin. There is a region sitting just behind your forehead. It's called the prefrontal cortex. If you've ever made a plan, resisted a distraction, or held a thought in your mind long enough to finish a sentence, this region was doing its quiet work. In a brain with ADHD, this part of the cortex operates differently. Not broken, not missing, tuned to a different rhythm. The neurotransmitter dopamine, a molecule involved in motivation and the feeling that something is worth paying attention to, moves through this area with less consistency. It arrives in smaller surges. It fades more quickly. And the result is not a shortage of attention, but a shortage of control over where attention lands. Your brain has a kind of internal project manager. That manager sits in the prefrontal cortex and decides, moment to moment, what matters right now. Should you keep reading this email or check the sound that just came from the kitchen? Should you stay on this thought or follow the new one that appeared from nowhere? In a neurotypical brain, the project manager makes these calls with relative ease. In an ADHD brain, the project manager is still present, but the signals it sends are softer, easier to override, easier to miss entirely. This isn't about intelligence. It isn't about effort. It's about the volume of a chemical signal inside one specific part of the brain. Dopamine doesn't simply govern focus. It also shapes reward. When dopamine signaling is inconsistent, the brain has trouble assigning value to tasks that don't carry an immediate payoff. A deadline 3 weeks away feels abstract, almost fictional. A task with no obvious reward can feel physically painful to begin. And a conversation that requires sustained, patient listening becomes an invisible endurance test. The prefrontal cortex relies on dopamine to sustain what neuroscientists call working memory. Think of working memory as your mental whiteboard. It's the small, temporary space where you hold information you are actively using. A phone number someone just told you. The beginning of a sentence you haven't finished yet. The reason you walked into this room. In an ADHD brain, this whiteboard fades faster than expected. A thought that was vivid 2 seconds ago simply vanishes. And the person experiencing this doesn't feel forgetful the way you might imagine. They feel startled. The thought was right there. Then it wasn't. Here's the thing about this experience. From the outside, it looks like carelessness. From the inside, it feels like watching your own mind erase itself mid-sentence. You can't retrieve the thought. You can't even remember what category it belonged to. It's just gone. And the brain does not accept this passively. It adapts. It constructs workarounds. Over years, over decades, it builds an elaborate, invisible architecture designed to compensate for every gap that dopamine leaves behind. That architecture is what we call masking. ADHD is not a single presentation. Clinicians describe at least two main patterns. The first, the hyperactive impulsive type, is the one most people picture. A child who can't sit still. A boy who blurts out answers before the teacher finishes the question. A student who moves through the classroom like a small weather system. This version is visible. Teachers notice it. Parents notice it. The second type is quieter. It's called the inattentive presentation. It looks like daydreaming, staring out of a window during a lesson and not hearing a word, reading the same paragraph 4 times and absorbing nothing. A girl sitting perfectly still in her seat while her mind drifts through 7 unrelated thoughts in under a minute. This is the version that slips through. The diagnostic criteria for ADHD were developed primarily from studies of boys. Only 21% of participants in the DSM-5 field trials were girls. So the symptoms most strongly associated with ADHD are the loud, disruptive ones. The ones that create problems in classrooms. A girl who daydreams doesn't create problems for her teacher. She creates problems only for herself, and so she isn't sent for evaluation. She is told to try harder, pay more attention, stop being so sensitive. She absorbs those instructions, and her brain, already wired to adapt, begins to build. Let's stay with working memory a little longer. Imagine that your mental whiteboard is roughly the size of a notebook page. You can hold a few items on it, manipulate them, refer back to them while you work on something else. Now imagine that same whiteboard is the size of a sticky note, and the ink fades every few seconds. That's working memory in ADHD. It's not gone, but it's smaller and less reliable. And the brain, being the extraordinary problem solver that it is, responds by doing something that looks from the outside like obsessive behavior. It makes lists. Not one list, lists upon lists, on paper, on phones, taped to mirrors, stuck inside notebooks, pinned to the edges of computer screens. Because if the internal whiteboard fades, you build an external one. If you can't hold it in your mind, you hold it in the world. The prefrontal cortex also manages something called task initiation. Not the ability to do something, the ability to begin. In a neurotypical brain, starting a task generates a small dopamine release that propels you forward into the work. In an ADHD brain, that initial release may not come. The result is a strange, invisible paralysis. You know what you need to do. You want to do it. You may even feel anxious about not doing it. But the bridge between intention and action has a gap in it. You're standing on one side, staring at the other, unable to cross. Women with ADHD describe this experience with startling consistency. It's not laziness. It's not procrastination the way most people understand it. It's a neurological pause that the rest of the world cannot see. The brain's workaround for this initiation gap is clever. It breaks tasks into pieces so small that the barrier to starting each one becomes almost negligible. Instead of write the report, the internal instruction becomes open the document. Then type one sentence. Then read it back. Then type one more. This is sometimes called microtasking. It works, but it requires an extraordinary amount of mental energy to maintain. Each micro-step must be consciously planned, consciously initiated, consciously completed. What a neurotypical brain does automatically, flowing from one step to the next, an ADHD brain must do manually, over and over, all day long. Imagine driving a car where you have to consciously think about every gear change, every mirror check, every single turn of the steering wheel. You could do it, but by the end of the day, you'd be exhausted in a way that other drivers simply wouldn't understand. There's another feature of the ADHD brain that rarely gets discussed in calm terms. It's called time blindness, and it's not a metaphor. Your brain's sense of time depends on dopamine circuits in the basal ganglia and prefrontal cortex. When these circuits are underactive, the internal clock runs differently. 5 minutes and 45 minutes can feel identical. A deadline 2 hours away might as well be 2 weeks away. The transition from "I have plenty of time" to "I have no time at all" happens without warning, like a switch flipping in a dark room. Women with ADHD compensate by building elaborate time scaffolding. Not one alarm, not two, 5 alarms. Alarms with labels, alarms with color codes. Alarms set 15 minutes before the real alarm just to prepare for the real alarm. They leave for appointments absurdly early, or they are always late, despite wanting desperately to be on time. There is no middle ground because the internal mechanism that creates a middle ground doesn't function the way it does in other brains. The prefrontal cortex is also where the brain manages emotional regulation. This is the quiet process of adjusting your emotional response to match the situation, not suppressing emotion, adjusting it, turning the volume down on frustration so you can finish a conversation, softening disappointment so you can try again tomorrow. In ADHD, this adjustment system is less reliable. Emotions arrive at full volume. A small criticism can feel enormous. A moment of rejection can trigger something close to a physical pain response. And the effort required to modulate these feelings, to appear calm when your internal world is in a storm, is one of the most exhausting aspects of masking. Nobody sees the storm. They see a woman who seems fine. So far, we've been looking at the basic architecture of an ADHD brain, the dopamine differences, the working memory limitations, the initiation gap, the time blindness, the emotional intensity. These are neurological features. They're present from birth. They don't appear because of bad parenting or insufficient willpower. But the story of masking isn't just a story about neurology. It's a story about what happens when neurology meets a social world that wasn't designed for it. And that meeting begins early. Consider a classroom. 2 children, a boy and a girl, both have ADHD. The boy fidgets, talks out of turn, leaves his seat. He is noticed. He may be scolded, but he's also referred for assessment. His behavior already has a shape that adults recognize, even if no one has named it yet. The girl daydreams. She loses her pencil. She forgets instructions. She works slowly, not because she's incapable, but because her focus drifts and returns like a radio signal fading in and out. She isn't disruptive. She isn't loud. And so the teacher says something like, "She's bright, but she doesn't apply herself." That sentence becomes a kind of verdict. It tells the girl that the gap between what she could do and what she does is her fault, not a feature of her brain, her fault. Social conditioning in childhood works differently for girls. Research shows that girls receive stronger feedback for being quiet, compliant, and organized. Boys are given more latitude for disruption. This isn't a conspiracy. It's a pattern embedded in how adults respond to children, and it shapes behavior long before the child is aware of it. For a girl with ADHD, this feedback is formative. It teaches her that her natural attention pattern, the drifting, the intensity, the impulsivity, isn't acceptable. Nobody says you have a neurological difference and it's unacceptable. But the world around her consistently rewards a version of herself that sits still, remembers instructions, and doesn't cry when she's frustrated. So she begins to perform that version, day after day, year after year. Here's what the developing brain of a girl with ADHD does. Before she has any name for what she's compensating for, before she knows what ADHD is, before she's heard the word dopamine, before she has any idea that her prefrontal cortex works differently from her classmates, her brain begins constructing compensatory routines. These aren't conscious strategies, not at first. They're automatic adaptations. The brain notices what works, what gets positive feedback, what avoids correction, what makes the adults in her life relax, and it reinforces those patterns. Smile when you're confused, nod when you've lost track, write everything down even if you don't understand it yet. Watch what the other girls do and do that. Match their tone, match their timing. This is the beginning of the mask, and the girl building it doesn't know she's building anything at all. A network of brain regions is involved in this kind of social mirroring. Scientists sometimes call it the mirror neuron system. It was first documented in macaque monkeys, in a region called the ventral premotor area. Human neuroimaging has since mapped its equivalent in our own brains. The core of this system sits in the inferior frontal gyrus, a region in the lower part of the frontal lobe, and the inferior parietal lobule, which integrates sensory and motor information. These regions activate both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform that same action. It's as if the brain rehearses in shadow whatever it observes. But for social masking, there's another layer, the emotional layer. This involves the insula, a deep-set region associated with body awareness and emotional feeling. It also involves the amygdala, which processes threat and social signals, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors the conflict between what you feel and what you're showing. In a girl with ADHD who is learning to mask, these systems are working overtime, scanning the room, reading faces, adjusting behavior in real time, and doing all of this not as a social skill but as a survival strategy. The superior temporal sulcus deserves its own mention. This is perhaps the most socially specialized node in the entire mirroring network. Brain imaging studies show that the posterior portion of this region responds to faces, bodies, biological motion, goal-directed actions, emotion, social interaction, and speech. What's particularly striking is that within the imitation network, this region is the only one where activity is significantly greater during imitation than during passive observation alone. That distinction matters. It suggests this region isn't just watching, it's actively computing the correspondence between your own actions and those of the person in front of you. For a girl learning to mask, this region is essentially running a continuous comparison. What are they doing? Am I matching it? Does my face look right? Is my timing close enough? That comparison runs quietly, constantly, below conscious awareness most of the time. Dr. Alok Kanogia once made an observation that applies here. He said everyone is focused on changing behavior. Why not just change the tendency? This distinction matters for tonight's story. The girl with ADHD isn't taught to understand her tendency, the neurological difference that shapes how she pays attention, how she feels emotions, how she experiences time. Instead, she's taught to change her behavior, to override the tendency. to force compliance with a system that wasn't built for her particular brain. She does it. She does it so well that nobody suspects anything is wrong. The autonomic nervous system, the part of your nervous system that controls heart rate, breathing, and digestion, is shaped in part by early relationships. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman has discussed how the autonomic nervous system is adjusted by the presence of another. When a caregiver is calm, the child's nervous system learns to settle. When a caregiver is anxious, the child absorbs that pattern. For a girl with ADHD, the message from caregivers is often subtle but consistent. Calm down, focus, stop fidgeting, pay attention. These instructions usually come with love, but the autonomic nervous system doesn't process intention. It processes pattern, and the pattern says your natural state isn't acceptable. Correct it. Over time, the child's nervous system learns to suppress the visible signs of ADHD, the restlessness, the emotional surges, not because the symptoms have gone away, but because the body has learned that showing them brings correction. The mask isn't just cognitive, it's physiological. It lives in the nervous system itself. The feedback loop tightens as the girl grows older. In adolescence, the stakes climb. Friendships become more complex. Academic demands escalate. And the compensatory strategies that worked in childhood must now become more elaborate to keep pace. She learns to rehearse conversations before they happen, not casually, methodically. She thinks through what the other person might say, plans her responses, anticipates follow-up questions. Because spontaneous conversation is a minefield when your working memory fades mid-sentence, and your emotional reactions arrive at full intensity before you have a chance to modulate them. She develops scripts for phone calls, for meetings, for casual small talk at parties where everyone else seems to improvise effortlessly. The scripts are invisible and they work, but each one costs energy. Each one requires the prefrontal cortex to manage manually what other brains manage without thinking about it. And now, something that often surprises people. Many women with ADHD perform well in school. Some perform exceptionally well. This academic success becomes one of the strongest barriers to diagnosis. How could someone who earns high marks have ADHD? The answer is that those marks are purchased at an invisible cost. Hours of extra studying, obsessive rereading, late nights fueled not by focus, but by the low hum of anxiety that something has been missed. Perfectionist overcorrection that turns every assignment into a marathon. The grade on the paper looks identical to everyone else's. The effort behind it is wildly different. And because the grade is visible and the effort is invisible, nobody asks questions. A girl with ADHD who performs well academically receives a specific kind of reinforcement. She's told she's smart, capable. She could do anything if she just applied herself a bit more. And she internalizes this message, which contains a hidden blade. If she's smart enough to succeed, then any struggle must be a choice. Any failure must be laziness. Any difficulty must be a character flaw. This is how the mask becomes welded to the identity. It's no longer a strategy, it's a belief system. I'm fine, I just need to try harder. We move now into the specific tools that women with ADHD construct across a lifetime. These are the strategies, the systems, the workarounds. They're worth examining closely because they reveal something about the brain's capacity for adaptation that goes far beyond any single diagnosis. The first and most universal of these tools is the external memory system. Because working memory is unreliable, women with ADHD construct elaborate external substitutes. Color-coded calendars, multiple planning apps running simultaneously on the same phone, whiteboards covered in sticky notes, notebooks with tabs, subtabs, cross-references. This is not simple organization. This is a parallel memory architecture built to hold everything that the brain's internal whiteboard cannot retain, and it must be maintained constantly, updated, checked, compared against itself. Because the moment it falls out of date, the entire system becomes untrustworthy, and the anxiety spikes. The lists deserve their own observation. Women with ADHD don't just make lists. They make lists of lists. They rewrite lists that already exist, because the act of rewriting helps transfer information into a different kind of memory storage. They carry lists in their bags, on their phones, in screenshots, in voice memos sent to themselves at odd hours. Some women describe the list-making itself as a form of self-regulation. The act of writing things down reduces the noise inside the mind. It takes the swirling cloud of tasks, obligations, and half-formed plans and pins, each one to a fixed point. Even if the list is never fully completed, its existence provides a structure the brain cannot build internally. There's a particular kind of list that appears again and again in women diagnosed with ADHD in adulthood. It's the list made not because the task is complex, but because the fear of forgetting is constant. Buy milk. Reply to that email. Move the laundry to the dryer. These are not complicated actions, but without the list, they dissolve. And the woman who has experienced that dissolution 1,000 times learns never to trust her own memory for even the smallest task. The planning rituals extend far beyond what most people consider normal preparation. Time blindness means that estimating how long something will take is genuinely unreliable. So the compensation is over-preparation. Extreme time buffering that might look, from the outside, like obsessiveness. A woman might set 5 alarms for a single appointment. She might plan her route the night before, check it in the morning, check it again before leaving. She might arrive 30 minutes early and wait in her car, reading her phone, pretending she's not early at all. Because the alternative, misjudging the time and arriving late, carries a weight of shame that seems disproportionate from the outside but makes complete sense from the inside. She carries spare documents, backup chargers, extra copies of things she probably won't need. The experience of forgetting something essential has happened enough times that the only defense is redundancy. Layer upon layer upon layer of it. There's a strategy called body doubling. It means working in the physical presence of another person, not collaborating, not talking, just being in the same room as someone who is also working. For a brain that struggles with internal motivation, the presence of another person creates a kind of external scaffolding. The social cue of someone else being focused provides the dopamine nudge that the brain can't generate on its own. This isn't about accountability. It's about borrowed structure, borrowed momentum. Many women with ADHD describe this without knowing there's a name for it. They study in coffee shops. They work in shared offices even when a private office is available. They call a friend and put the phone on speaker, not to talk, but to feel accompanied. And this quiet strategy, so simple from the outside, is the brain solving a neurological problem with a social solution. One of the most counterintuitive compensations is using anxiety as a focusing tool. Many women with ADHD discover, often without conscious awareness, that the pressure of an approaching deadline triggers a dopamine surge powerful enough to break through the initiation barrier. So they wait, not because they want to, not because they're lazy or disorganized, but because the only state in which their brain can generate enough neurochemical momentum to start is mild panic. This works. In the short term, it works remarkably well. The last-minute rush produces focused, intense, often high-quality work. But it also means the woman is living in a constant cycle of calm paralysis, followed by frantic activation, followed by collapse. And when a clinician observes this pattern, they often diagnose generalized anxiety disorder. Because the anxiety is visible, the ADHD underneath it is not. The social masking strategies are perhaps the most invisible and the most costly. A woman with ADHD in a social setting is performing a quiet, continuous calculation. She's monitoring her facial expressions to make sure they match the emotional tone of the conversation. She's tracking what was said 30 seconds ago so she can respond appropriately, even though her working memory has already begun letting the details slip. She's suppressing the impulse to interrupt, to change the subject, to say the thing that just appeared in her mind with urgent clarity and will vanish if she doesn't say it right now. She's doing all of this at once and making it look effortless. The effort is enormous. It accumulates. By the end of a social event, the exhaustion isn't the ordinary tiredness of being around people. It's the specific depletion of a brain that has been manually performing functions that other brains handle without a single conscious thought. Emotional regulation during social interaction requires its own set of tools. Because emotions in ADHD arrive at full intensity, the masking woman develops internal dampening techniques. She pauses before responding, not for effect, but to give herself time to modulate a reaction that would otherwise be too strong, too visible, too much. She smiles to signal calm, while internally processing a wave of feeling that doesn't match the smile at all. She may develop a specific social voice, slightly different in pitch and pace from her natural speaking voice. This social voice is a mask within the mask. It sounds warm, engaged, present, and it's constructed piece by piece from years of studying how other women sound when they are fitting in. Intellectual masking follows its own pattern. In academic and professional settings, the woman with ADHD often develops a strategy of overpreparation that borders on compulsive. She reads the material 3 times before a meeting. She writes notes, then rewrites them. She writes notes about her notes. She prepares for questions that might be asked, for questions that probably won't be asked, and for questions that have nothing to do with the meeting at all. This overpreparation serves 2 purposes. It compensates for the possibility that her working memory will fail in the moment, that she'll forget a key point, lose her train of thought, or blank on a name she knew 5 minutes ago. And it provides a psychological safety net. If the preparation is thorough enough, the margin of error shrinks to a size that her anxiety can tolerate. The work produced is often excellent, but the cost in hours, in mental energy, in the quiet erosion of rest and recovery, is invisible to everyone except the woman doing it. Perfectionism in ADHD masking isn't the same as ordinary perfectionism. It's not driven by a desire for excellence. It's driven by a fear of exposure. If the work is perfect, nobody will look more closely. Nobody will notice how it was produced. Nobody will see the 8 drafts, the rewritten paragraphs, the document opened and closed and opened again at 2 in the morning. Perfectionism is the final layer of the mask. It makes the compensation invisible by making the output indistinguishable from what a neurotypical brain might produce with far less effort. These compensatory strategies don't exist in isolation. They interact. They reinforce each other. The lists support the time buffering. The overpreparation supports the perfectionism. The social scripts support the emotional regulation. Together, they form a complete, self-sustaining system, an invisible infrastructure that allows the woman to move through the world as if her brain works the way everyone expects. The system is remarkable. In its own way, it represents a kind of intelligence. The brain, lacking the neurochemical support it needs for automatic function, has constructed a manual override for almost every process that other brains handle without conscious input. But every manual override has a cost. Some women develop a specific compensatory behavior around transitions. The ADHD brain struggles with shifting from one task or environment to another. The neurotypical brain manages this fluidly, closing one mental file, opening another. An ADHD brain can get stuck, locked into the previous activity, unable to shift gears even when the situation clearly demands it. So masking women build transition rituals, a specific sequence of actions performed between tasks. Close the laptop, stand up, walk to the kitchen, fill a glass of water, return, open a new tab. These rituals serve the same function as the microtasking strategy. They break the overwhelming act of switching into small, manageable pieces that the brain can initiate one at a time. From the outside, this looks like a quirky habit. From the inside, it's the only way to cross from one part of the day to the next. Hyperfocus is the counterpart to distractibility, and it confuses people. A woman with ADHD can sometimes focus so intensely on a single task that she loses track of everything else. Hours pass, meals are skipped, the phone goes unanswered, the world outside the task disappears. This isn't a contradiction. It's the same dopamine system behaving inconsistently. When the brain stumbles onto a task that generates enough dopamine reward on its own, the focus locks in with an intensity that neurotypical brains rarely produce. The project manager doesn't just prioritize this task, it eliminates everything else from the whiteboard. And the masking woman learns to use this. She identifies which tasks trigger hyperfocus and leans into them. She structures her day, when she can, around these windows of intense productivity. But she can't predict them. They arrive on their own schedule. And when they don't come, she's back to microtasking and anxiety-driven deadlines. There's a particular pattern around food and meals that often goes unmentioned. Executive function governs meal planning, grocery shopping, cooking, and eating at regular intervals. For a woman with ADHD, each of these steps requires conscious initiation. The "I should eat" signal doesn't always generate the dopamine push needed to actually prepare food. So meals get skipped, or they're replaced by whatever requires the least initiation energy. A handful of crackers eaten standing in the kitchen, coffee instead of breakfast. The same takeaway order repeated for a week because decision fatigue makes choosing a meal feel impossibly heavy. And when someone asks, "Have you eaten today?" she has to think about it, genuinely think, because the answer isn't always obvious. The management of personal belongings is another area where masking is constant. The ADHD brain doesn't automatically track where objects are placed. Keys, wallet, phone, documents. Each one must be consciously monitored, consciously placed in a designated spot, consciously retrieved. Neurotypical brains handle this through a process called spatial memory encoding that runs largely without effort. An ADHD brain doesn't encode these memories as reliably. So the masking woman creates systems: a hook by the door for keys, a specific pocket for her phone, a bag that goes in the same spot every single night. And when these systems are disrupted, when someone moves the keys, when the routine is interrupted, the entire structure wobbles. Losing things isn't about carelessness. It's about a brain that doesn't automatically record where it last saw an object. The relationship between ADHD and reading is particular. Many women with ADHD love reading. The problem isn't comprehension, it's sustaining attention across a long text. The eyes move over the words, but the mind drifts. You reach the bottom of a page and realize you've absorbed nothing. You start again, drift again, start again. Masking women develop strategies for this too. Reading in short bursts, highlighting compulsively, taking notes in the margins so the physical act of writing anchors attention to the page, listening to audiobooks at a specific speed that prevents the mind from wandering. These strategies work, but the experience of reading for a masking woman is fundamentally different from the relaxed absorption that other readers describe. It's active, effortful, managed. The relationship between ADHD and conversation has its own texture. In a flowing group conversation, the ADHD brain generates responses quickly, sometimes before the other person has finished speaking. The impulse to contribute is strong because the thought will vanish if it isn't expressed in the next few seconds. Masking women learn to hold these impulses. They develop physical anchors, pressing a fingertip against a thumb, biting the inside of a cheek, placing a hand flat on their leg as a physical reminder to wait. These are invisible restraint systems, small bodily techniques that prevent the impulsive speech from escaping before the socially appropriate moment arrives. And when the moment does arrive, the thought is sometimes gone. The whiteboard wiped clean. So she nods and says, "Sorry, I lost it," and the conversation moves on, and nobody realizes what it cost her to wait. We shift now toward the clinical reality of what this sustained concealment means. The diagnostic gap that allows masking to continue for years, sometimes for decades, before anyone recognizes it for what it is. The most precise recent data on the sex-based diagnostic gap comes from a study conducted at Vall d'Hebron University Hospital in Barcelona. Researchers led by Dr. Silvia Amoretti analyzed a sample of 900 adults receiving their first-ever ADHD diagnosis. The sample was roughly 55% male, 45% female, with an average age of about 37. The central finding was this: females were diagnosed at a mean age of approximately 29 years, males at approximately 24 years, a gap of about 5 years, despite symptoms appearing at similar ages in both groups. Think about that for a moment. 5 additional years of unrecognized struggle. 5 years of building compensatory systems without understanding why they're needed. 5 years of being told or telling yourself that you just need to try harder. Dr. Amoretti noted that although ADHD symptoms started at a similar age in males and females, women were diagnosed years later than men. She observed that this delay may lead to worse clinical outcomes, including depression, anxiety, and functional impairment. The women in the study showed higher symptom severity by the time they reached diagnosis, worse psychosocial functioning, greater disability, not because their ADHD was inherently more severe, but because they'd spent more years compensating without support, more years burning fuel that was never replenished. A separate analysis drawing on 4 United States health databases found an even wider range. The mean age of ADHD diagnosis for females ranged from about 16 to nearly 29 years. For males, the range was roughly 11 to 23. This pattern held across multiple independent data sources, which means it isn't a regional anomaly. It's a structural feature of how the medical system identifies or fails to identify ADHD in women. At the population level, the gender gap in adult ADHD prevalence decreased by roughly 31% between 2007 and 2012. This sounds like progress, and it is. But the reason the gap narrowed is that doctors were finally beginning to diagnose women who'd been missed for decades. The women were always there. The system just wasn't looking for them. Several reinforcing factors keep this gap in place. The diagnostic criteria themselves were built from a male-dominated sample. The symptoms most strongly linked to ADHD are the visible, disruptive symptoms more commonly found in boys. And the compensatory strategies women develop, the masking itself, actively prevent clinicians from recognizing the underlying condition. When a woman walks into a doctor's office with anxiety, the clinician sees anxiety. When she presents with depression, the clinician sees depression. When she presents with emotional instability, a clinician may consider borderline personality disorder. The most common initial misdiagnoses for masking women are generalized anxiety disorder and major depression. Borderline personality disorder appears frequently too. Each of these diagnoses captures something real, but each captures the surface, not the source. The academic performance paradox makes everything worse. A clinician reviewing a patient's history sees good grades, completed degrees, professional employment. The unspoken assumption is that ADHD would have prevented these things. The possibility that these achievements were purchased at an invisible cost, that they are evidence of masking rather than evidence against ADHD, often never enters the conversation. A woman who has spent her entire life compensating doesn't present the way a clinician expects an ADHD patient to present. She is organized, articulate. She has systems, and those systems are so effective that they conceal the very condition they were built to manage. Referral bias plays a role too. Boys with ADHD are more likely to be referred for assessment by teachers because their symptoms disrupt the classroom. Girls are more likely to be referred, if they're referred at all, by parents who notice something quieter. Difficulty with friendships, emotional meltdowns at home that don't happen at school, a sense that something isn't quite right without a clear picture of what it is. But many parents don't refer their daughters at all because the girl is managing. She's getting decent grades. She has friends. She seems fine. Seems fine is the most dangerous phrase in the diagnostic vocabulary of ADHD in women. The process of self-referral, the moment when a woman begins to suspect on her own that she might have ADHD, follows a recognizable pattern. It usually happens in her late 20s or 30s, sometimes later. She encounters information about ADHD, an article shared by a friend, a social media post, a colleague's offhand mention of their own recent diagnosis. And something shifts. She reads a list of symptoms and feels a strange, slow recognition. Not surprise, recognition. As if someone has described the interior of her mind with a precision no has ever managed before. The color-coded calendars, the 5 alarms, the rehearsed conversations, the exhaustion that doesn't make sense, the feeling of performing a version of yourself all day, every day, and being so depleted by evening that you can barely speak. That moment of recognition is not dramatic, it's quiet, and it often arrives with grief. Grief for the years spent believing that the gap between effort and outcome was a personal failing, when all along it was a neurological difference with a name. Some women cry, some feel numb, some feel a complicated mix of relief and anger that takes weeks or months to sort through. So I'm not lazy, I'm not broken, I just have a brain that works differently, and nobody told me. The path from recognition to formal diagnosis isn't always smooth. Many women describe bringing their suspicion to a doctor and being told they can't have ADHD because they did well in school, or because they don't seem hyperactive, or because their symptoms sound like anxiety, which, yes, they also have, because they've been anxiously masking an undiagnosed condition for 20 years. Some women are assessed on their first visit. Others spend years advocating for an evaluation. And some never receive a formal diagnosis at all, because the clinicians they see were trained on a model of ADHD built from studies of boys and simply cannot see what is in front of them. There's a particular frustration that women describe in the diagnostic process. They arrive at the appointment having done extensive research. They can articulate their symptoms clearly. They have examples, patterns, timelines. And this preparation, this very thoroughness, sometimes counts against them. Because someone who is this organized doesn't look like ADHD. The irony is suffocating. The masking that prevented diagnosis throughout childhood and adolescence continues to prevent diagnosis in the doctor's office. The system that was built to conceal the condition does its job so well that even when the woman is trying to reveal it, the mask still holds. We turn now to what this costs the body, because masking is not just a cognitive performance, it's a physiological state, and the body keeps a record. When the brain perceives stress, any kind of stress, it activates a system called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This cascade releases cortisol, a hormone that prepares the body for action. In short bursts, cortisol is useful. It sharpens focus, increases energy, mobilizes resources. But chronic masking is not a short burst. It's a sustained, low-grade stress state that persists for years. And under that kind of prolonged activation, the HPA axis begins to change. At first, cortisol levels rise. The body is working harder, compensating more, and the stress response stays elevated. But over time, something counterintuitive happens. The system doesn't keep climbing, it shifts. Cortisol levels drop below normal. The stress response becomes blunted. The body, having maintained high alert for so long, begins producing less cortisol than it should. This is called hypocortisolism. The pattern, initial elevation followed by a flattening, is shared with burnout and chronic fatigue. It's the body's way of protecting itself from its own stress hormones. But the protection comes with new costs. Blunted cortisol means reduced capacity to respond to fresh stressors, reduced energy, a sense of depletion that no amount of rest seems to resolve. There is a way to measure this. Hair cortisol concentration provides a record of cortisol levels over months, not hours. A single strand of hair can hold the cumulative stress load of the previous 2 or 3 months recorded in its very biology. Researchers studying chronic stress have used hair cortisol as a biomarker for the kind of sustained physiological burden that self-report questionnaires can't capture. In populations experiencing prolonged social camouflaging, whether due to ADHD, autism, or other forms of neurodivergence, hair cortisol patterns often show the signature of allostatic overload. Months of concealment, recorded in a strand of hair. Allostatic overload is a concept from stress physiology. It describes what happens when the body's adaptive systems, the ones designed to help you cope with stress, run for so long that they begin causing damage to the very systems they were meant to protect. Think about it this way. Your stress response evolved to handle short, intense threats, a predator, a conflict, a sudden environmental danger. The system activates, you respond, the threat passes, the system resets. That's allostasis. The body adapting to meet a challenge and then returning to baseline. Allostatic overload is what happens when the challenge never ends, when the system never resets, when the body stays in a low-grade defensive posture for years because the threat isn't a predator. It's a meeting, a phone call, a school pickup, a conversation with a colleague, the entire social world every day demanding a performance that the brain can only sustain at a cost. That cost accumulates across multiple physiological systems at once. The HPA axis, the autonomic nervous system, the metabolic system, the immune system. None of these fail in isolation. They're interconnected, and when one is strained, the others feel it. A woman who has been masking for 20 years isn't just mentally tired. Her body has been carrying the cost of that effort in her cortisol rhythms, her heart rate variability, her inflammatory markers, her sleep architecture. The exhaustion isn't psychological, it's physiological, written into the body. There's a proposed mechanism that links chronic social stress to something even deeper, to the level of the cell itself. It's called mitochondrial allostatic load. Mitochondria are the structures inside your cells that produce energy. When the body endures sustained stress, mitochondrial function can become disrupted. Energy production at the cellular level decreases. This may explain a specific quality of exhaustion that masking women describe with striking consistency. It's not the tiredness of a long day. It's not the fatigue of poor sleep, though sleep is often disrupted too. It's a bone-deep depletion, as if the body's ability to generate energy has been fundamentally reduced. Rest doesn't repair it. Weekends don't repair it. Even vacations provide only brief relief before the pattern reasserts itself. The autonomic nervous system carries its own signature of chronic masking. In a healthy resting state, the autonomic system maintains a balance between the sympathetic branch, which accelerates the body, and the parasympathetic branch, which slows it down. Chronic masking pushes this balance towards sympathetic dominance. The body stays slightly activated, slightly vigilant, slightly ready for the next moment when the mask might slip. Over years, this subtle shift affects cardiovascular health and digestive function. It shapes the quality of rest even during sleep. A woman in a state of chronic sympathetic activation may not feel anxious. She may feel normal, because this has been her normal for as long as she can remember. The baseline was set so early that she has no reference point for what a truly relaxed nervous system would feel like. The immune system registers the burden too. Sustained cortisol dysregulation alters the inflammatory response. Some masking women experience chronic low-grade inflammation, not enough to produce acute illness, but enough to contribute to fatigue, joint stiffness, brain fog, and a general sense that the body is working against itself. This isn't weakness. It's a predictable consequence of a stress system designed for short-term threats being repurposed for a decades-long social performance. Sleep carries its own particular cost. Women with ADHD who mask during the day often find that the mask only comes off at night. The quiet hours after everyone else has gone to bed become the only time when the brain can stop performing, the only time it belongs entirely to the person inside it. And so the night becomes a space for processing, for thinking the thoughts that were suppressed all day, for feeling the emotions that were dampened, for simply existing without an audience. This is why so many women with ADHD describe staying up too late, not because they aren't tired. They're profoundly tired, but the night is the only time that's truly theirs, the only time the mask is fully off. So they stay awake, trading tomorrow's energy for tonight's freedom. The menstrual cycle introduces a layer of variability that most ADHD research has historically ignored. Estrogen has a direct relationship with dopamine activity in the brain. Higher estrogen levels are associated with increased dopamine availability. Lower estrogen levels correspond with reduced dopamine activity. This means that a woman's ADHD symptoms can shift across the month. In the follicular phase, when estrogen rises, masking may feel slightly easier, not because the ADHD has resolved, but because the dopamine system has received a temporary hormonal boost. In the luteal phase, when estrogen drops, the same compensatory strategies that worked last week may feel impossibly heavy. And the woman doesn't connect this to hormones. She connects it to personal failure. Good weeks mean she's trying hard enough. Bad weeks mean she isn't. Emotional exhaustion in chronic masking has a particular texture. It isn't sadness exactly. It's more like a slow withdrawal of color from the world. Activities that once brought joy feel flat. Social connections that once felt sustaining feel like obligations. The capacity for spontaneous pleasure, the ability to feel good about something without having to plan it, earn it, or perform it, gradually fades. This looks from the outside like depression, and it often is diagnosed as depression, but the mechanism underneath is different. Depression involves a primary disruption in mood regulation. Masking exhaustion involves a depletion of the resources needed to sustain a performance that was never supposed to be permanent. Treat the depression alone and the masking continues. Address the masking, and the depression often begins to lift on its own. Dr. Catherine Page Harden has observed that adolescence is a critical window for the emergence of mental health challenges. And this is the same window during which masking habits crystallize most firmly. The girl who was compensating informally in childhood now formalizes her strategies. She develops rigid routines. She creates backup plans for her backup plans. She learns to read a room before she enters it, adjusting her posture, her expression, her energy to match what the environment seems to expect. The effort of all this, the cognitive load, the emotional suppression, the constant self-monitoring, arrives just as her brain is undergoing its most intense period of development. The masking doesn't just conceal ADHD during adolescence. It shapes the developing brain. It becomes woven into the neural architecture itself. By the time she reaches adulthood, the mask isn't something she wears. It's something she is. Hormonal shifts at key life transitions introduce instability into a system already under maximum strain. Puberty, the postpartum period, perimenopause. Each of these transitions alters the estrogen levels that were, quietly, propping up dopamine availability and making the mask slightly more sustainable than it would otherwise have been. During puberty, estrogen levels rise, and for some girls with ADHD, masking may temporarily become slightly easier. But the boost is unstable. It fluctuates. It's unreliable as a foundation for a compensatory system that is already running on fumes. Pregnancy introduces a dramatic shift. Estrogen levels rise substantially, and some women with ADHD report that their symptoms actually improve during pregnancy. Focus sharpens. Organization feels easier. The mask requires less effort. Then the baby arrives. Estrogen levels drop, and the woman, now sleep-deprived, physically depleted, and facing the most demanding executive function challenge of her life, finds that her compensatory systems are collapsing. The lists don't help anymore. The alarms are overwhelmed by the unpredictability of an infant's needs. The routines that held everything together are shattered by a schedule that has no fixed pattern. And the diagnosis that was never made becomes, for the first time, impossible to conceal. Many women receive their ADHD diagnosis in the postpartum period, not because their symptoms are new, but because the hormonal support that was quietly propping up their masking has been withdrawn all at once, while demand has skyrocketed. Perimenopause introduces a slower but equally destabilizing decline. Estrogen levels decrease over months and years, and with them, the dopamine availability that supported decades of compensation. Women in their 40s and 50s describe a gradual unraveling. Strategies that once worked automatically now require conscious effort. Tasks that were manageable become overwhelming. The internal whiteboard, already small, seems to shrink even further. This is often attributed to normal aging, but for women with undiagnosed ADHD, the decline is steeper and the impact is greater because the margin they were operating on was already razor thin. There was no buffer. There was never a buffer. ADHD burnout is a distinct phenomenon. It isn't the same as workplace burnout, though they can overlap and often do. It's the collapse of compensatory systems under accumulated load. Think of it like a bridge carrying more weight than it was designed for. The structure holds. It holds for years, decades. And then, without any warning visible from the outside, something gives. The woman stops being able to make her lists. She stares at the planner and can't process what she sees. The alarms go off and she turns them off without acting. The routines that were automatic become effortful, then impossible, then abandoned entirely. From the outside, this looks like a sudden deterioration. From the inside, it's been building for a very long time. The paradox of successful masking is cruel in its logic. The more effectively a woman masks, the less support she receives. Her competence is taken at face value. Her organization is assumed to be natural. Her calm is believed to be genuine. So nobody offers help because nobody perceives a need. When the burnout arrives, when the compensatory systems finally fail, the people around her are bewildered. She seemed fine. She was always so put together. What happened? What happened is that the infrastructure collapsed, and nobody knew it was infrastructure because it was invisible. The collapse of masking doesn't look the way most people imagine. It isn't dramatic, it's quiet. A woman stops returning messages. She misses appointments she used to keep with military precision. She cries in her car for reasons she can't name. She lies in bed not because she's depressed, though she may also be depressed, but because her nervous system has exhausted its capacity to produce the performance that the world requires of it. This is not laziness. This is a system shutdown. It's the brain and body saying this cannot continue. There's a specific grief that accompanies ADHD burnout. It's the grief of watching yourself fail at things you used to manage. The gap between who you were last year and who you are now feels like evidence of deterioration, of getting worse, of losing yourself. But you aren't losing yourself. You're losing the mask. And underneath the mask is a person who has been running a marathon in dress shoes for 20 years and has finally stopped. Recovery from masking burnout is slow. It doesn't follow a straight line. And it begins with something that sounds simple but is, for a masking woman, one of the hardest things she will ever do. It begins with stopping. Not stopping work, not stopping life, but stopping the performance, allowing the alarms to be visible, allowing the lists to be seen by other people, allowing the forgetfulness to happen without shame attached to it. For a woman who has spent decades concealing her neurology, this isn't a small step. It's a fundamental reorientation of her relationship with herself. Dr. Kanogia's observation returns here. Everyone is focused on changing behavior. Why not just change the tendency? For women unmasking from ADHD, this means shifting away from strategies designed to hide how their brain works, toward strategies designed to work with it. The goal isn't to eliminate the need for lists, alarms, and color-coded systems. The goal is to use those tools without shame, to recognize them not as evidence of failure, but as evidence of a brain that has been solving problems its entire life. Diagnosis itself can be therapeutic, not because the label changes the neurology. It doesn't, but because naming the pattern allows the nervous system to release some of the vigilance that has been sustaining the mask. When a woman learns that her experience has a name, that the vanishing thoughts, the time blindness, the emotional intensity, the exhaustion of appearing normal are features of a known neurological difference, something in the body relaxes, not all at once, but gradually, like a muscle you didn't know was clenched finally beginning to let go. The constant background question, "What is wrong with me?" begins to be replaced by something different, something that opens rather than closes. Building systems that serve the brain as it actually is, rather than the brain it was trained to pretend to be, is the quiet work of post-diagnosis life. It means choosing planners that match how the ADHD brain processes information: visual, spatial, color-coded, not the minimalist, linear formats designed for neurotypical sequential thinking, but planners that externalize the way an ADHD mind actually organizes information, in clusters, in colors, in spatial relationships on a page. It means setting alarms without apologizing for them, asking for written instructions without embarrassment, using body doubling intentionally and openly, not as a secret workaround, but as a legitimate and effective tool. It means learning to say, "I'll forget this if I don't write it down right now," and discovering that most people respond to this with understanding, not judgment. There's a particular quality of relief that comes with unmasking. It isn't the dramatic relief of a burden suddenly lifted. It's more like the feeling of taking off shoes you didn't realize were too tight. The discomfort was so constant that it had become invisible. Only when it stops do you notice how much energy it was draining from you, hour by hour, year by year. Women who begin unmasking describe a strange sensation of meeting themselves for the first time, discovering that the person behind the mask is not the chaotic, failing person they feared, but someone who has been engineering solutions to neurological challenges her entire life, doing it with a creativity and persistence that most people never have to develop. The process of disclosure, of telling the people in your life about the diagnosis, has its own rhythm. Some women tell everyone at once, flooded with the relief of finally having an explanation. Others tell no one for months, testing the new understanding privately before letting it become public. Some relationships deepen with the disclosure. Partners who never understood why small things caused such distress begin to see the invisible labor. Friends who notice the early departures from social events, the long silences after busy weeks, the occasional tears that seem to come from nowhere, finally have a context for what they were witnessing. Other relationships struggle. People who benefited from the mask, who relied on the performance without knowing it was a performance, may resist the change. You seemed fine before. Why can't you just go back to how you were? But how she was the mask, and the mask was never sustainable. There's a recalibration that happens slowly, over months and years, as a woman learns to distinguish between the parts of herself that were constructed for performance and the parts that were genuine all along. The love of color-coded systems, that might stay. Some ADHD brains genuinely enjoy visual organization. The compulsive overpreparation, that might soften, not disappear entirely, but loosen its grip as the woman learns to trust that forgetting something is not a moral failure. The social voice, the one she built from years of careful observation, parts of it may remain, other parts may fall away, replaced by a way of speaking that feels less polished but more honest. Self-compassion in the context of late ADHD diagnosis is not simple. It's not a matter of reading an inspirational quote and deciding to be kinder to yourself. It requires undoing decades of internalized criticism, rewriting the narrative that says every struggle was a choice, every forgotten task was carelessness, every emotional outburst was a character flaw. It means looking back at the girl who built the mask, the girl who taught herself to mirror, to rehearse, to prepare for every possible failure, and recognizing that she wasn't weak. She was working with the tools she had. She was solving a problem no one told her she had. The brain's capacity for compensation is itself a form of intelligence. The elaborate systems, the social scripts, the time scaffolding, the emotional modulation strategies, these weren't given to these women. They built them from scratch, without instructions, without even knowing what they were building or why. A brain that can construct an entire parallel operating system to conceal its own differences isn't a broken brain. It's a brain that has been working harder than anyone around it realizes. And recognizing that, really sitting with that understanding, can be its own quiet form of healing. The nervous system is, at its core, an adaptation machine. It evolved not to be perfect, but to be responsive, to adjust, to compensate, to find new pathways when the expected ones are blocked. Every neuron that fires, every circuit that forms, every habit that crystallizes is the nervous system doing what it has always done, adapting to the world it finds itself in. Women with ADHD have adapted with extraordinary thoroughness. They've built systems that allowed them to function in a world that wasn't designed for their neurology. And the cost of that adaptation, the exhaustion, the delayed diagnosis, the years without support, is real. But the adaptation itself is worth seeing clearly, not as pathology, as engineering. Somewhere tonight, a woman sets her 3 alarms. She closes her color-coded planner. She puts her phone face down on the nightstand, the screen still glowing with a list that is only half checked. The lists can wait. The scaffolding holds. And the brain, that quiet, tireless, endlessly adapting brain, begins its oldest form of maintenance. The body settles. Breathing slows. Thoughts soften at the edges, becoming less like instructions and more like clouds passing through a wide, dark sky. The mask is off, and sleep, for now, asks nothing of her at all.